Well, today in Mark chapter 12, verse 25 to 27, we're going to look at when the Sadducees ask Jesus about the resurrection. Now, Judaism in the first century was not a unified movement, not at all. As a matter of fact, there are several sects of Judaism. And certainly there are some things that united them, right? So like monotheism, for example, right? They all believe that there's only one God. But there was a lot of different Jewish sects. Each kind of had their own emphasis. I suppose very similarly to like Protestant Christians today. A Baptist is very, very different than a Lutheran, for example. There are things that unite us, but there are a lot of things that are different. Right, but in Jesus' day, not only did you have the religious belief system of Judaism, but you also had some political influence in there as well. And so the different sects of Judaism, politically, one might be a zealot and they might advocate for the overthrow of Rome's rule over the Holy Land by any means necessary. Some of them even kind of becoming what we would call a terrorist, right? Or one might be a Herodian and support Herod's dynasty and support Roman rule over Palestine. Those two groups would be very much opposed to each other. Theologically, a Jewish person could join the Essenes, which was kind of a monastic sect that advocated the withdrawal from society to a life of purity in the wilderness. The Dead Sea Scrolls are attributed to the Essenes, right? They were living outside of Jerusalem because they viewed society itself as having been corrupted. Or a Jew could follow the Pharisees, who kept oral traditions of the rabbis, and they stressed divine sovereignty, and they affirmed the resurrection of the dead. Right? So they would follow the scriptures as they saw it, but then also they would elevate the traditions and the teachings of the rabbis. But today we're going to look in Mark's gospel. We find a different sect called the Sadducees. They're a first century Jewish group that stressed the power of free will, who believed a theology could be based only on the 5 books of Moses. Now, the Sadducees are probably one of the 2 more famous groups of Jews in Jesus' day, the Sadducees and the Pharisees. And if you were to compare them today or kind of describe them in a nutshell, you could say that the Pharisees were more conservative and the Sadducees were more liberal. All right, but the Sadducees themselves believed that only the 5 books of Moses, Genesis through Deuteronomy, were to be followed. The rest was not to be followed. And because they believed that only the 5 books of Moses were to be followed, right, their belief then was that the Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection of the dead, because we don't find the resurrection of the dead specifically taught in the first 5 books of the Bible. Now, we do find it kind of referred to, and it kind of implies that, but it doesn't specifically talk about the resurrection of the dead. And Christ showed that the 5 books of Moses do teach the resurrection when the Sadducees asked him a question while he ministered in Jerusalem that last week of his earthly life. All right, so the Sadducees, what they're doing is they're coming to Jesus. They're hoping to prove that the resurrection of the dead was impossible, but really kind of what they're looking to do is they're looking to kind of publicly prove Jesus to be a fool. They're looking to publicly humiliate him in front of the crowd is kind of what they're doing, right? And so if you think about it, maybe it's like a very liberal group of people coming to someone who they view as more conservative, and they would have viewed him as kind of foolish and uneducated, and kind of he'd spent time with the poor and kind of the downcast of society. Therefore, he could not be as intelligent or bright as them. And so they look to both prove their theology correct and prove Jesus as a fool. And so their question about which of the 7 brothers would keep the one wife that all of them had married was really based on kind of some marriage customs. And it comes from, according to the law, a man was to marry his brother's wife if his brother would to die without having an heir. In other words, so if a man gets married and dies before he has an heir, then that man's brother was to marry his late brother's wife and have a child with that woman, and then that child would be viewed as the original husband's heir. And you can find some of that in like Deuteronomy 25. We can see a little bit of it also in Ruth chapter 4. And so the scenario that the Sadducees are presenting, which 7 brothers all married the same woman because none of them produced an heir, wasn't really something that would happen. It was just kind of they're kind of throwing it out in theory to prove Jesus to be foolish and to prove their views of the resurrection to be accurate. If the doctrine of the resurrection might lead to the problem of determining which of the brothers didn't have the wife, they had all married for all of eternity, right? And so they're kind of presenting this problem. If the resurrection is true, then you have this problem with all of these brothers and a wife. And it was a problem, according to the Sadducees, that would have been impossible to solve. It could be a teaching worth rethinking. But Jesus notes something. The problem and the denial of the resurrection was based on something that the Sadducees just completely missed. See, Jesus responds to them, and he responds to them in such a unique way. These Sadducees who saw themselves as very wise, and they see Jesus as completely foolish and uneducated and kind of low class. Jesus looks at them, and in Mark chapter 12, verse 24, Jesus says to the Sadducees, in 24, it says, "And he said to them, is this not the reason you are wrong? Because you know neither the scriptures nor the power of God." So Jesus looks at them as they present their question. They say, if the resurrection is true, then you have this problem that is not able to be solved. Look how brilliant we are. And Jesus' response to them is, you don't even know your Bible, and you don't even know the power of God. See, Jesus humiliated the arrogant Sadducees by showing that they simply did not know the scriptures that were taught on the subject. Jesus humbled them. A group who claimed to focus entirely on the 5 books of Moses, a group who says we only get our scriptures from these 5 books, or these 5 books, the law, that's the only place we go, and we're experts in those 5 books. They relied too heavily on their tradition, and their theology was weak as a result, and Jesus exploits them. What an incredible moment. Tomorrow we're going to look at John chapter 15, verses 1 to 11, where Jesus is teaching the disciples in this famous farewell discourse, where Jesus teaches, "I am the vine." We'll see you tomorrow.